Marcus had always prided himself on reading people. In boardrooms, he could spot a lie before it left someone's lips. But when Elena smiled at him across that crowded gallery opening, something fundamental shifted. She seemed to see straight through his practiced confidence to something raw and unguarded underneath. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen. The courtship unfolded like a fever dream, orchestrated by invisible hands. Elena appeared everywhere Marcus needed her to be. At the art exhibit, discussing Rothko's use of shadow, just as Marcus revealed his secret love for abstract expressionism. At the coffee shop, reading Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. When Marcus mentioned his philosophy degree, collecting dust, she laughed at precisely the right moments, her fingers finding his arm with perfect timing, her silence creating spaces where his deepest confessions could bloom. In this surreal theater of romance, Elena transformed into something more than human, a mirror with consciousness, a shapeshifter who could inhabit any form his desire required. When he spoke of his childhood loneliness, her eyes welled with the exact shade of empathy he'd been craving since age 7. When he mentioned his fear of mediocrity, she became fierce and protective, whispering that he was extraordinary in ways the world had never recognized. The city itself seemed to conspire in their courtship. Restaurants appeared with tables bathed in golden light, streets emptied at precisely the moments they needed solitude. Even thunderstorms broke overhead, just as they required dramatic backdrop for their most passionate declarations. But mirrors, when examined closely, reveal their essential emptiness. 6 months into their relationship, Marcus began to notice the cracks in the reflection. Elena's favorite books changed depending on which intellectual impression she was crafting that week. Her childhood stories shifted in small but crucial details. Sometimes she was an only child, sometimes the youngest of 3, sometimes the eldest carrying impossible burdens. Her political opinions morphed to match whatever stance would create the most seductive friction with his own beliefs. The revelation arrived not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a slow, suffocating recognition. Elena wasn't discovering who he was. She was becoming who he needed her to be. And in that terrible moment of clarity, Marcus understood that he had fallen in love, not with a person, but with his own reflection, perfected and reflected back to him through another's calculated performance. As Schopenhauer warned in his studies of human nature, what we call love is often the will's most sophisticated trap. We pursue not another soul, but the mirage of our own completion. The ancients called it enchantment. Today, psychology names it mirroring, the unconscious behavioral adaptation where one person reflects another's gestures, speech patterns, values, and desires to create artificial intimacy, coined through the work of psychologists. Studying narcissistic relationships, mirroring manifests everywhere in modern life, in job interviews where candidates reshape their personalities to match company culture, in social media where we curate versions of ourselves for different audiences, in relationships where we lose track of our authentic selves while trying to become what we think others want. Schopenhauer would recognize this as one of the will's most elegant deceptions. It convinces us we've found our perfect match precisely because we're seeing ourselves reflected back with supernatural accuracy. The will uses our deepest need for connection to trap us in relationships with phantoms, keeping us perpetually dissatisfied because we're trying to love a mirror that can only show us what we already are, never what we might become. In myth, Narcissus fell in love with his own reflection and wasted away. In you, it's the partner who seems too good to be true, who understands you too perfectly, who never challenges you to grow. What does it mean that the love you treasure most is the love that asks nothing of you? What are you so afraid of in yourself that you'll choose the beautiful lie over the difficult truth of being known as you actually are, flaws and contradictions intact? The most dangerous spell isn't the one that transforms you into something else. It's the one that convinces you that your reflection is another person. A throne sits empty in every room of the palace, and she who should rule kneels instead before each vacant seat. Sarah had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. At dinner parties, she became the listener who made everyone feel brilliant. In meetings, she offered just enough insight to seem valuable while never threatening anyone's position. She had learned early that power meant making others feel powerful, that love meant making herself small enough to fit whatever space was left for her. But tonight, standing in her apartment after James had casually mentioned he might stay at his place instead, something cracked open. The space around her transformed into a vast palace of impossible architecture, room after room stretching into infinity, each containing a magnificent throne that gleamed with unused authority. These were not seats of political power, but something far more intimate. The throne of her own desires, the throne of her boundaries, the throne of her right to take up space in the world. In this surreal kingdom of abdicated sovereignty, Sarah moved like a ghost haunting her own potential. She approached the first throne, carved from what looked like crystallized moonlight, and felt the weight of every time she had said, "Whatever you want," when asked her preference. The second throne, wrought from silver that sang when touched, reminded her of every moment she had swallowed her anger to preserve someone else's comfort. The third, made of glass so clear it was nearly invisible, reflected all the times she had made herself transparent so others could shine. But the most magnificent throne sat at the palace's heart, carved from wood that seemed to pulse with life. This was the seat of her authentic self, the woman who had opinions that might upset people, who had needs that might inconvenience others, who had a voice that might drown out the carefully orchestrated harmony she'd spent decades maintaining. As she approached this final throne, phantom versions of everyone she'd ever loved materialized around her, their faces twisted with disappointment and rejection. "If you sit there," they whispered in unison, "we will leave you alone forever." And so she knelt before the empty throne, as she had knelt before all the others, choosing the familiar ache of self-abandonment over the terror of possibly being abandoned by others. The palace dissolved around her, leaving only her small apartment and the echo of James's voice saying he might not come home. Schopenhauer understood this peculiar form of suffering, how we create our own chains, not through external oppression, but through the will's twisted logic that convinces us love requires the complete erasure of self. The ancients called it sacrifice. Today, psychology names it self-abandonment, the unconscious habit of consistently prioritizing others' needs, feelings, and desires over our own to maintain relationships and avoid rejection. First identified in trauma and attachment research, self-abandonment manifests in modern life through people-pleasing behaviors, chronic overgiving in relationships, inability to set boundaries, and the persistent feeling of being invisible, even when surrounded by people who claim to love us. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the will's cruelest paradox. It convinces us that love requires self-erasure, when true connection actually demands the courage to remain whole. The will uses our deepest fear of abandonment to make us abandon ourselves first, ensuring we remain trapped in relationships where we are loved not for who we are, but for how small we're willing to become. In myth, kings died for their kingdoms. In you, it's the part that dies a little every time you say, "I don't mind," when you absolutely do. Where is your throne waiting? What kingdom have you surrendered because you were taught that queens who rule their own lives rule alone? The most tragic abandonment isn't when someone leaves you. It's when you leave yourself behind, over and over, until you forget there was ever anyone to come back to. A woman builds a cathedral from the bones of every person who has ever loved her, but the structure collapses each time she tries to live inside it. David collected relationships like rare books, each one promising to complete some essential part of his inner library. With Anna, he was the tortured artist who needed saving. With Michael, he became the successful entrepreneur who craved intellectual challenge. With Lisa, he transformed into the wounded soul seeking maternal comfort. Each persona felt genuine in the moment, but when the relationships inevitably ended, he was left holding masks that no longer fit any face he recognized. The revelation struck him on a Tuesday morning, sitting in his empty apartment and surrounded by artifacts from his discarded selves: Anna's art supplies, Michael's philosophy books, Lisa's healing crystals. The space around him began to shift and breathe, walls expanding until he found himself standing in a vast construction site where reality itself was under renovation. Here, phantom architects worked tirelessly, each one wearing the face of a past lover, building impossible structures from the emotional materials David had borrowed from their relationships. In this surreal landscape of psychological construction, David watched in fascination and horror as these ghostly builders erected monuments to borrowed identity. They mixed concrete from Anna's passion with Michael's intellectual rigor, laying foundations of Lisa's nurturing on ground that kept shifting beneath the weight of accumulated expectations. Cranes lifted prefabricated personality modules skyward, sensitivity here, ambition there, spirituality balanced precariously on top. Each structure was magnificent and completely uninhabitable because they were built not from David's authentic self, but from his desperate attempts to become worthy of love by becoming whoever his partners needed him to be. The most ambitious construction rose at the site's center, a cathedral of borrowed hearts, its spires reaching toward an unreachable heaven of perfect love. But as David approached this monument to his romantic history, the ground beneath began to crack. The borrowed materials, all the adopted interest, imported values, and assumed personalities couldn't bear the weight of genuine intimacy. One by one, the structures began to collapse, not from external force, but from their own internal contradictions. Schopenhauer's insight echoed through the falling debris. The will's cruelest trick is convincing us that love requires us to become someone else, when love can only flourish between authentic selves. The ancients called it possession. Today, psychology names it identity foreclosure. The process of prematurely committing to an identity without exploring alternatives, often adopting the expectations and values of significant others, rather than developing an authentic sense of self. Originally described by psychologist James Marcia in his studies of identity development, this phenomenon manifests in modern life through serial monogamy, where people reinvent themselves for each relationship. Career changes that follow partners' expectations rather than personal passion, and the exhausting feeling of being a different person depending on who's in the room. Schopenhauer would see this as the will's sophisticated deception. It promises that love awaits if we can just become the right person for the right partner, keeping us trapped in an endless cycle of self-transformation that never leads to genuine connection. The will uses our longing for love to ensure we never discover who we actually are beneath the costumes we wear for others. In myth, Proteus could change into any shape, but could only tell the truth when held in his original form. In you, it's the exhaustion of being whoever others need you to be. What would happen if you stopped auditioning for love and started living it? Who are you when no one is watching, when there's no role to play, no expectation to meet? The deepest tragedy isn't that no one loves the real you, it's that you've forgotten who that person is. A map hangs on every wall, each one leading to a place that exists only in the space between promise and fulfillment. Rebecca had turned waiting into an art form. She waited for David to leave his wife, for her promotion to finally come through, for her mother to approve, for her body to feel right, for her writing to find its audience, for life to begin properly. She had become fluent in the language of, "When this happens, then I'll be happy," crafting elaborate futures that shimmered just beyond her current circumstances, like mirages in an emotional desert. The realization struck during another sleepless night scrolling through social media, watching other people's carefully curated happiness, while her own life felt perpetually stuck in rehearsal. Her bedroom walls began to stretch and multiply, transforming into the archives of a celestial cartography department. Here, infinite maps covered every surface, not geographical charts, but detailed blueprints of unlived lives, each one marking the precise location of happiness that waited just around the corner, just after the next achievement, just beyond the next relationship, just past the next major life change. In this impossible library of deferred dreams, Rebecca found herself studying the intricate artwork of her own postponed existence. One map detailed the exact route to the life she'd live once she lost 20 pounds, the clothes she'd wear, the confidence she'd embody, the love she'd finally deserve. Another charted the precise coordinates of the career satisfaction that awaited her promotion, complete with the respect she'd command and the creative freedom she'd finally claim. A third map, drawn in silver ink that shifted in the light, traced the path to the version of herself that would emerge once her toxic relationship ended. Independent, fierce, uncompromising in her boundaries. But the most elaborate map dominated the archive's central wall, a masterpiece of psychological geography that detailed every route to the country called "Then I'll Be Happy," and its borders were marked by conditions: weight loss here, career success there, perfect love along the eastern shore, family approval marking the southern boundary. The terrain was impossibly detailed, every landmark of future fulfillment precisely noted, but something was fundamentally wrong with the scale. No matter how far she traced any path, the destination remained exactly the same distance away, as if the map itself were designed to preserve the journey while ensuring the arrival never came. Schopenhauer's insight whispered from the margins. The will ensures that satisfaction, once achieved, immediately transforms into new forms of wanting, keeping us forever in pursuit of a happiness that retreats the moment we approach it. The ancients called it hope. Today, psychology names it deferred life syndrome, the chronic pattern of postponing authentic living while waiting for ideal conditions that never arrive, often accompanied by the belief that happiness exists in a future version of ourselves rather than being accessible in the present moment. While not formally recognized as a clinical diagnosis, this phenomenon appears throughout literature, on depression, anxiety, and life satisfaction, manifesting in modern life through endless preparation phases, perfectionism that prevents action, and the perpetual feeling that real life is always about to begin. Schopenhauer would recognize this as one of the will's most elegant traps. It keeps us forever reaching toward a future satisfaction that, by its very nature, cannot provide lasting fulfillment. The will uses our capacity for hope as a mechanism of control, ensuring we remain focused on tomorrow's promised happiness rather than discovering the contentment available in this moment. In myth, Tantalus reached eternally for fruit that pulled away from his grasp. In you, it's the happiness that waits just to the next milestone. What if the life you're preparing for is the life you're already living? What if the person you're waiting to become is already here, just buried under the weight of conditions that will never be perfect enough? The cruelest prison isn't built from bars, it's built from the word when. A woman guards a library where every book contains a story she's forbidden herself to live, and the only key to leave hangs around her neck. Catherine had organized her life like a well-curated museum, each emotion properly labeled, every impulse contained behind glass, all the dangerous possibilities of who she might become safely archived in rooms she'd locked and never visited. She was proud of her self-control, her measured responses, her ability to remain composed when others fell apart. But lately, she'd begun to hear whispers coming from the sealed sections of herself, stories that wanted to be told, chapters that demanded to be written. The breakthrough came during another perfectly orchestrated dinner party where she played hostess with surgical precision, anticipating every need, smoothing every social friction, ensuring everyone felt comfortable while she disappeared into the role of gracious facilitator. As the last guest left and she began mechanically cleaning up, the walls of her orderly home began to shift and expand, revealing themselves as the facade of something far more complex. An infinite library where she served as both curator and prisoner. In this labyrinthine archive of unlived possibilities, Catherine discovered the true magnitude of her self-imposed exile. Each bookshelf contained stories she'd forbidden herself to explore, volumes of righteous anger she'd never allowed herself to feel, collections of wild creativity she'd deemed too risky, entire sections devoted to the sexual desires she'd categorized as inappropriate, philosophical treatises on the rebellious thoughts she'd labeled as selfish. The restricted section housed her most dangerous volumes, books that told stories of the woman who spoke her truth, even when it shattered relationships, who chose her own fulfillment over others' comfort, who dared to disappoint people rather than disappoint herself. But the most magnificent and terrifying tome sat alone on a pedestal at the library's heart. The complete works of Catherine Unchained, a leather-bound chronicle of every authentic impulse she'd ever suppressed, every genuine response she'd edited before speaking, every wild dream she'd domesticated into respectability. The book pulsed with life, its pages rustling with the sound of all the laughter she'd deemed too loud, all the tears she'd deemed too messy, all the passion she'd deemed too much. As she reached for it, a key materialized around her neck. The same key that had always been there, the key she'd somehow convinced herself belonged to someone else. The moment her finger touched the book's spine, the entire library began to tremble. She realized that she wasn't the prisoner here, she was the jailer, and she'd been holding the key to her own liberation all along. The stories behind the glass weren't forbidden by some external authority. They were forbidden by her own fear of what might happen if she let herself become fully human. Schopenhauer's darkest wisdom echoed through the stacks. We are our own most vigilant guards, ensuring our imprisonment. Through the elaborate rituals of self-denial, we mistake for virtue. The ancients called it virtue. Today, psychology names it emotional suppression, the chronic avoidance or inhibition of emotional experiences, particularly those deemed socially unacceptable or threatening to our self-image, often resulting in psychological distress and disconnection from authentic self-expression. Extensively studied in emotion regulation research, suppression manifests in modern life through perfectionism, people-pleasing, chronic anxiety about others' reactions, and the exhausting effort of maintaining a carefully controlled public persona while inner emotional life withers from neglect. Schopenhauer would identify this as the will's most insidious strategy. It convinces us that happiness comes through the elimination of desire rather than the courageous engagement with our full humanity. The will uses our fear of social rejection to make us reject ourselves first, ensuring we remain trapped in narrow identities that protect us from genuine living while guaranteeing perpetual dissatisfaction. In myth, Pandora's box contained all of humanity's troubles, but also hope. In you, it's the parts of yourself you've decided are too dangerous to let out. What stories are you protecting the world from by protecting yourself from them? What would happen if you stopped being the guardian of your own prison and became the author of your own liberation? The most sophisticated cage isn't locked from the outside. It's the one where you've convinced yourself that freedom is too dangerous to want.